Hello and welcome to this lesson on Shared Preferences APIs and components in Android. The Shared Preferences API offers an easy way for storing groups of key-value paired information. No extra permissions are required when using shared preferences in your application. The shared preferences created through API calls in an application are stored in files in that application's secure data space. In that same vein, when application is uninstalled or the Clear Data button is used in the app info, these preferences are deleted. Shared preferences can only contain primitive values like booleans, floats, integers, longs, and strings, paired with a string key for each value. As of API 11 and above, a collection of strings formed in a set can also be saved to the shared preferences. Shared preferences are not strictly for saving user preferences, such as what ringtone a user has chosen. If you're interested in creating user preferences for your application, take a look at the preference activity, which provides an activity framework for you to create user preferences, which will be automatically persistent using the shared preferences. Key value sets can be useful for storing information, like user settings for an application or important application events. Some of these occasions may be storing that a user has already opened the application for the first time, so that there is no need to show an introduction screen again. Allowing the user to store if they would like to receive certain types of notifications for the application. Saving a username and password combination for future logins of the application. Allowing for autofilling of a form based on previous form information. Storing other previous selections from previous actions like a preferred picture for a user avatar in chat. Note that images themselves cannot be saved reliably in the shared preferences, but a reference to the picture could be saved in the shared preferences for later usage. Reading and writing to the shared preferences of an application can be accomplished easily by using the Shared Preferences API. For reading a shared preference, we first need to gain a reference to that specific shared preference by calling the getSharedPreferences method, with a string name of the shared preference and an operating mode for access. Normally the usage of 0 or mode private is used since this is the default operating mode. Once the reference is obtained, values can be found by calling get methods for the type of value. For instance, for a Boolean value, we can call the getBoolean method on the shared preference with the key for the value and a default value in the case the key is not found. In addition, we can verify if a specific key exists by calling the contains method with that key. And we can attach an onSharedPreference change listener to the preferences by calling register onSharedPreference change listener to listen for changes on that shared preference. When we would like to write to a shared preference, we need to obtain that shared preference's editor by calling the edit method on the reference to that shared preference. Once the editor reference is obtained, we can add or update values by calling put methods for that type. For instance, put Boolean with a key and a value to add or update that key with the associated Boolean value. Once all of the put operations have been run, we need to commit the changes by calling the commit method on the editor. Otherwise, the changes will not be pushed to the shared preference. There are additional methods like apply, which will apply changes to the in-memory shared preference immediately, but asynchronously commit them to disk. Clear, which will mark in the editor to remove all values upon next commit. And remove, which receives the key string for the key value pair to remove from the shared preference. We've created here a simple application for utilizing the Shared Preferences API. First, let's take a look at the UI for this application. We see that this application has a simple UI consisting of an edit text and two buttons. The first button is for saving the preferences, and the second button is for reading the preference from the shared preferences. Now let's jump over to our Java code for our activity and see how the onClick is dealt with for these two buttons. We see in our activity that we have two string constants. One is prefName, which will be the name for our shared preference we are saving our value to, and the second is keyword, which will be the key for our value within our shared preference. In our onCreate, we obtain the shared preference with the prefName we specified in our constants, and we obtain the edit text field for later usage. We set in our XML onClick listeners for both the buttons, which call back to our onClick method here. In our onClick button callback, we determine which button was pressed by using the button's ID. When the Save button is pressed, we obtain the editor for our shared preference and put the string from our edit text in the shared preference with our key defined in our constant keyword. Then we must not forget to commit these changes or they will be lost and not committed to our shared preference. When the Show button is pressed, we obtain the value for the constant keyword, and in the case where there is no value saved in our shared preferences, we request the default value of no word yet, which we set here as a string. We then post that string in a new toast message. Now let's run the application and take a look at how this logic plays out in runtime. We see in our emulator that if we press the Show Preference button before we have set the preference string, we receive the toast with a string no word yet, since this is the first time we are running the application and no preference has been stored in previous runs of the application. Now once we enter a preference value, and we click the Save button, or Change Preference button, then we can press the Show button to retrieve that string from our shared preferences. And we see that the preference is shown. This preference will be saved for future runs of the application unless the data for this application has been deleted or the application has been uninstalled. Thank you for joining us in this lesson on shared preferences. Join us in our next lesson where we'll take a look at using databases in Android development.